This photo of the Memphis skyline is going to be the one we use to start demonstrating targeted adjustments. So typical raw file, it's flat, it's dull, nothing's really popping on it. I don't like the overall exposure on it. So what are we going to do to fix it? I always take a look at my photo and get a general idea before I start creating layers to try to get a roadmap in my head. Well, I want to do something about the sky in the upper half. I also want to brighten the skyline and the foreground here in the lower half. I want to add probably some sharpness to the skyline and maybe a little vibrance to make it pop. So how would we do this? First thing we're going to do is talk about the difference between the types of adjustments in Photoshop. If you go over here to Image and Adjustments, you're going to see a list of pretty standard photographic adjustments, levels, curves, exposures, and all that. I never use this menu because this is a one and done. You change something in here, it changes the photograph, and you can't come back in and readjust it without deleting the layers. What Photoshop provides under the layer menus is what they call a new adjustment layer. And it does two things for you. One, it allows you to come back in and readjust at any time. And secondly, it creates layer masks for you automatically so you can apply your targeted adjustments. So let's talk about levels first. We're going to do a levels on the sky. And let me call that sky to label my layer. See what it did right away. It created a layer with a white layer mask, and remember, white reveals, so it's going to show whatever our adjustment is over the entire photo. And it popped out a property screen to let us adjust the levels and get a different looking sky. So let's adjust the sky a little bit. I'm going to bring the midtones up and darken that, and the sky looks a bit bluer. It has more pop, but of course it didn't do really well for the rest of the program, for the rest of the photograph. So let's put a layer mask in. Paint our layer mask. Now what we could do is get a brush like here and start painting the effect in where we want. But there are some shortcuts. You don't always have to paint on a mask. So let's select our gradient tool here and make sure that the gradient selected is from black to white, and make sure our mask is selected. And what we are going to do is we're going to start at the bottom of the photograph and bring our gradient all the way up to the top, and you'll see what happens. What it did, let's switch, using your Alt key and clicking on the mask, you can see what it did. It created a mask going from black to white at the top. In other words, concealing the effect and gradually revealing it in a more natural way. So if I take the visibility off, you can see what it did to the sky. The sky looks better without affecting the rest of the photograph. And then here is the great thing about using the built-in Photoshop adjustments is right here. If you double click on the adjustment, even after you save it, if it's a day later or a week later, you can come in and make further adjustments no matter what. So this photograph will be eternally adjustable for the effect that you want on the sky. Well, let's do something about the skyline and the foreground. That really needs to be brighter to pop a little more. So I'm going to create another levels layer, but I'm going to point out here you also have an adjustment screen. So all the list of adjustments are right here. You don't have to go to the menu. If you do not see this in your copy of Photoshop, go over here to Window and select Adjustments, and then you'll see this panel jump up. So let's select Levels again, and it does the same thing for us. And this time I'm going to focus more on brightening. Okay. Now, but what it did is it sort of took out the drama of my sky because it brightened everything. As you know, we have a white mask on, which means reveal everything that was done. So what I'm going to do is the same thing I did here, except I'm going to reverse the direction. I'm going to select my gradient tool, make sure it's black to white. We'll start up here and come down from the top. Okay, so what it did was, you can see it's affecting the middle and the foreground. So now I've brightened it without doing anything to the other effect that I did on the sky. Okay, it's looking pretty good. The buildings and the little bit of landscaping here looks kind of dull, so I'd like to put a little extra vibrance on this. So I can go up here to my adjustments and find the vibrance right over here on the right. Select vibrance, and again, it's probably more than I would do, and as you can see, it's affecting the entire photograph when I really only want to catch the buildings in the skyline. So at this point, what I want to do, since I want to get this narrow strip, I'm going to go ahead and paint on this mask, paint the effect in. I could go and paint it out, but that would be a lot more work. So what I need to do is make this mask black. And you can do that by using Control-I on the PC or Command-I on the Mac. And we're going to grab our paintbrush, and we're going to make sure that our foreground is white. And if it isn't, you can click over here and it'll create default foregrounds and backgrounds. And from our previous lessons, I'm going to use the quick mask, which is the / key. So now we're going to start painting. Make sure your mask is selected here. And we are going to start painting in the vibrance onto the landscape. So let's paint this in. Again, especially if your adjustment isn't that drastic, it doesn't matter if there's spillover. It doesn't have to be exact if you're using a soft brush. Go up here and you'll see that my hardness is set all the way down to 100, so it feathers that effect in quite nicely. And you can also change the size of your brush if you want to get some more effect in. Now if you make a mistake and say, oops, I did too much there, since we're painting on a black mask with white, if we want to paint that out, we need to paint with black. And all we have to do is reverse our colors here. If you hit X on the keyboard, that reverses our colors. And it's like an eraser, and we can paint that part of the mask back in. Alright. Of course, don't forget to hit X to get back to your white if you want to paint the mask. So let's look at our mask right now. Do Alt, click on the mask. Oops, there we go. So you can see painting in the vibrance effect onto the skyline. Alright, so let's take that layer on and off. Might be a little hard to see on the screen, but we're getting a lot more pop in the landscape. We've added some vibrance. I think the finishing touch that I want to do on this is add some sharpness to the skyline. It's not quite sharp enough for me. Now, there are many ways to sharpen in Photoshop. The one that I prefer is using what's called the high pass filter. But to use a filter, it's not one of the Photoshop adjustments. So I am going to have to create a layer that has all this information already baked in so I can apply the filter to it. So if you remember from our previous video, that is going to be a merge visible. And the shortcut keys for that is Control, Alt, Shift, or Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. Okay, so now we have a layer that represents everything that's been done here, and I can apply my sharpening to it. So how I'm going to do it is go up to Filter, and I go up to Other and High Pass. And what it does is it's really adding contrast to linear features in the photograph, and as you can see here, that's what this little mask is showing you. Now, one thing I don't like is it's adding some sharpening to the water and to the sky. I really don't want it to do that, but we'll fix that with the mask. So we're going to say, now usually I don't sharpen this much, but so that you can see it on the big screen here, I did it for example purposes. So let's say OK. And we have to change the blending mode. And you can either use overlay for a crispier look or soft light. Let's use overlay so y'all can see it. I hope you can see that turning off and on. But I don't like the sharpening on the rest of it, so I can add a mask to it. But I want it to start out as a black mask so I can conceal that sharpening effect. So if I hold down the Alt key and go down to create a new mask, I have my black mask. I'm going to go into my quick mask routine, make sure I've got my paintbrush and that it's set to white so I can paint out the mask. Let me make that a little bigger so we'll go quicker here. Again, I would be a little more careful if I was doing this for real, but just so you can see the results. Okay, so let's look here. We'll take that on and off. There we go. Okay, and you can see from the detail, like down here, look at the detail down there, how that's now popping out. All right. Well, I think the photograph looks pretty good. If you remember, this is where we started. And this is where we ended up. With a non-destructive workflow, with these three adjustments, we can come back and adjust at any time. Now, this filter adjustment, if we wanted to redo it, we're going to have to delete that layer and recreate it and put a high pass filter of a different value on it. However, there is a trick where you can create your own adjustment style layers, and we're going to look at that in a later video.